The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old vinyl, the kind of place you'd pass by without a second glance. But in the far left corner, beneath a slow-ticking clock, sat a woman the world had already overlooked. Grace Torres didn't wear medals or demand attention. She just folded napkins with the same steady hands that once pulled brothers in arms from burning wreckage. A Marine, a survivor. But to most here, just the woman in the wheelchair. Until one cruel laugh, one spill of hot coffee cracked the silence and reminded everyone exactly what it means to serve with honor and what happens when those who serve are finally seen. The diner always hummed with the low comfort of routine, sizzling grills, clinking mugs, and worn-out classic rock echoing faintly from the back. Grace Torres liked it that way. In the far left corner of the rusty fork grill, just beneath the wall clock that lagged 5 minutes behind, she sat quietly in her wheelchair, hands moving with a rhythm learned long before this place had ever known her name. Roll the silverware, fold the napkins, stack, repeat. It wasn't exciting, but it was solid. It kept the noise out. She wore a faded work shirt, collar slightly frayed, with her Marine Corps pin carefully fastened. Always straight. Every movement she made held the same precision she'd once used to clean her rifle under a canvas tarp in Fallujah, waiting for whatever came next. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. At 45, Grace was a former staff sergeant. 2 tours in Iraq had left her with one leg, scar tissue she never bothered to hide, and a silence inside her that few could reach. The world had taken more than flesh. It had burned away the ease she used to carry. The wheelchair squeaked softly when she shifted, but she didn't mind. It was better than the prosthetic. This was real. Grace never asked for extra hours. Dave, the manager, gave her short lunch shifts and didn't question her quiet. Most of the customers nodded in passing. A few avoided her eyes altogether. Some looked away too fast, uncomfortable with her presence, as if her missing leg might make them feel guilty for still having both of theirs. Grace didn't take it personally. She wasn't here for attention. She was here for structure, for control, for peace. In the breast pocket of her flannel coat, tucked close to her chest, was a cracked leather wallet containing a single photograph. Her unit, smiling before the blast. The last time she'd seen some of those faces whole, her own smile in that photo was wide, young, fearless. She hadn't looked at it in months, maybe years. But today something felt off, like an old wire about to snap. The door slammed open. The kind of slam that wasn't just loud, it was intentional. It jarred the room. Condiment bottles rattled on the counter and heads turned. In stepped 3 men, boots heavy on the tile, jackets thick, and leather vests patched with names like Tank, Goose, and Blade. Their laughter arrived before they did, booming, biting, aimed to dominate. Grace didn't move, but inside she felt it. That shift in the air, the static charge before something goes sideways, like dust hanging before a firefight. Tank led the way, big, red-faced, with a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. He scanned the room and spotted her instantly. "Well, look what we got here," he said, voice loud enough to carry. He nudged the others. "Someone roll in from the Vi." Goose snorted. "Nah, man, that's Combat Barbie. Bet she's just here for the sympathy tips." Grace didn't bite, didn't blink. Her hands continued folding napkins with surgical calm, even as the room tensed. These weren't new words. She'd been called worse by men who bled out before they could finish the sentence. But in this diner full of people who glanced down and said nothing, the words felt heavier, like a different kind of injury. Blade plopped down at the counter, hitting the service bell like it owed him money. "Hey, we getting menus or just staring at the help?" Grace wheeled over with practiced ease, spine straight, chin level. "Would you gentlemen like today's special?" she asked evenly. Her voice was flat but steady, measured. Tank grinned. "Sure thing, soldier girl." Then it happened. The move wasn't aggressive, not on the surface, just a nudge. Tank stepped in close and tilted the back of Grace's wheelchair. Not hard, just enough to throw her off balance, send her rolling backward into the edge of a booth with a dull thud. Silverware clattered across the floor. A coffee cup shattered just inches from her footrest. Liquid spread like blood across the tile. Grace didn't cry out. She didn't curse. She didn't even speak. But by the window, a young boy named Tommy saw it all. And so did his father, Sergeant Daniels, who had once worn the uniform of the 2nd Marine Division during Desert Storm. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. He reached slowly into his coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for his phone. Exactly 30 minutes later, a dark green military SUV rolled to a stop outside the Rusty Fork. The engine cut, doors open. 3 Marines stepped out, boots crisp against the concrete. The diner fell silent. Every plate paused midair. Every voice caught in throats. Inside, Grace still sat beneath that slow-ticking clock, her napkins neatly stacked. But something had changed. The quiet courage she'd carried into every battle she'd fought, overseas and at home, had just been witnessed. And now it was about to be honored. Grace didn't flinch when the insult started. She was used to that particular tone, the kind that tried to cut deeper by being just loud enough for everyone else to hear. "Roll it over," Tank sneered, the words slithering through the air like they owned the place. His voice rang too loud for the small diner, intentional, disruptive. Goose added his own jab with a crooked grin. "Funny they let people like you serve food. Ain't that against some kind of health code?" A couple sitting in the corner stirred uncomfortably, their utensils pausing midair. Behind the counter, the young waitress at the register pretended not to hear, wiping an already spotless sugar dispenser like her life depended on it. Grace said nothing. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was practiced, controlled. She moved like muscle memory, one menu down, then the next. Knife, fork, napkin, set precisely, each motion calm and deliberate. Tank muttered again, just under his breath, but aimed like a dart. "Don't they have kitchens for you back at the VA?" Still, Grace said nothing. She rolled forward, her chair humming softly across the tile. A snort of laughter came from a nearby booth. Blade leaned back in his seat, spreading his legs wide like a king on a throne. "Maybe she's here for combat training," he grinned. "Lesson 1, how to ignore your betters." Something in the air cracked. Not loud, but trill. The first fracture in the calm. The second was already on its way. Grace rolled toward the coffee station, her hands steady, her breath even. She reached for the pot like it was the simplest thing in the world. Her wheelchair nudged the counter gently as she poured. Behind her, the laughter rose again, like a bad chorus. Tank had more to say. He always did. "You know what I never got?" His voice rang out. "Why they ever started letting women into combat. Just slows everyone down." Goose chimed in, his words curling with contempt. "She probably sat behind a desk typing reports and calling it war." Grace didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The moment came on its own. Blade stood abruptly, the kind of sudden motion that comes when pride dares stupidity. He stalked after her, swaying slightly, the air around him reeking of beer and bravado. "You deaf soldier girl?" he slurred. "We're talking to you." Grace turned her head, not in fear, but calculation. She sized him up in a blink. He was bigger, sure, but slow, sloppy, the kind of threat you only engage when there's no other option. Blade stepped closer, then he crossed the line. He grabbed the handles of her wheelchair. No warning, no right, no permission. In one violent motion, he yanked the chair forward. The front wheel clipped a table leg. Her tray flipped. Hot coffee sloshed across her arm. A fork spun across the floor. And then, the sound she hadn't heard in years. Her own body hitting the floor. Hard. Her right leg twisted, the prosthetic buckling at a wrong angle. Pain shot through her hip where metal met bone. The diner went still. The busboy froze mid-step. The waitress behind the counter gasped, then went rigid. A couple by the window lowered their eyes into their drinks. No one moved. No one spoke. Blade laughed. So did Tank. So did Goose. The sound was different now, low, satisfied. Cruel. Grace lay there, pressed against the sticky floor, her palms braced on cold tile. Coffee seeped into her jeans. Her wallet had spilled near her hand, and with it, a photo slipped loose, faded, creased at the corners. A snapshot from another life. Her unit posed in desert fatigues, the sun beating down on them. On the back, someone had scrawled in thick black marker, "She carried us every damn time." She didn't cry, but the silence wrapped around her like armor cracking. She moved, slowly, not because she was broken, but because moments like this demanded precision. Her hands worked with the same muscle memory she'd used under gunfire. Her jaw clenched tight, breath steady. No one helped her. No one offered. The laughter had faded into that smug kind of quiet, the kind that believed it had already won. Grace reached for her chair, uprighted it in a single practiced motion, then climbed back into it, one hand on the wheel, one on the armrest. No flinch, no words. Her jeans, shirt, and Marine Corps pin were soaked in coffee and humiliation. A wadded napkin rolled by her wheel. She didn't bother with it. Near the front window, a boy, no older than 9, sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, eyes wide and unblinking. "Dad," he whispered, "is that lady a soldier?" His father turned slowly. A man, worn by time, his jacket patched with the ghosts of campaigns past. A faded cap pulled low over his brows. "Fug, Desert Storm, 2nd Marine Division." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked, really looked, at her hands, at the strength it took just to rise in silence. His jaw tightened as he stared at her soaked sleeves, at the worn photo lying beside her on the floor, the one with the word "carried" scrawled across the back in faded ink. For a moment, there was only silence between the man and the boy standing beside him. Then finally, in a voice low but full of something deeply certain, he said, "Yeah, Tommy, she's the real deal." He rose without noise, calm, steady, walked out of the diner with the kind of stillness that meant decision. The afternoon sun had turned the world gold, casting long shadows across the quiet town. He stepped onto the gravel beside his dusty pickup truck, pulled out his phone and held it to his ear. Yeah, he said plainly. "This is Sergeant Daniels. I need to report something." A pause, then a clarification. "No, it's not official. Civilian matter, but it involves one of ours." He waited another beat, eyes scanning the town like he was already seeing what was coming. "You'll want to send a team," he said, firm now. "Just trust me." Back inside, Grace remained seated at her corner table. Her body hadn't moved, but her hand was tugging gently at the cuff of her flannel sleeve, like it was something she had to fix. Her fingers brushed across her lap, as though dusting off something invisible. Then slowly they rose to press against her chest, just for a second, soft but sure, right over her heart. She didn't know it yet, but wheels were already in motion. Help was coming. 30 long minutes passed. The bikers had relaxed again, slipping back into the comfort of noise. Tank flagged the waitress down for another refill, waving his mug like nothing had ever happened. Goose was fiddling with a butter knife, letting it twirl between his fingers like a toy. Blade leaned back in his chair, his worn boots now propped up on the table, laughing louder each time someone in the diner dared to glance his way. But Grace? She stayed where she was, silent, still. She hadn't spoken, hadn't moved to serve anyone, hadn't even acknowledged the noise building around her. Her spine was straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were bracing herself for an unseen wave. The photo was gone, tucked safely back into her wallet, but her clothes still held the stains from earlier. The memories hadn't gone anywhere. Then the sound came. Tires on gravel, not the casual roll of a family sedan, but something heavier, purposeful. Every head in the diner seemed to tilt at once. Outside, a dark green military SUV pulled up slowly, the U.S. Marine Corps emblem gleaming on its door. Dust curled like smoke around its thick tires. It didn't park in the lot like the other cars. No, it rolled up to the front of the diner and stopped dead, engine running low, steady, commanding. Inside, the chatter died instantly. The front door opened with the kind of precision only discipline could carve. Not hurried, not hesitant, measured. 3 Marines stepped inside. Not a word was spoken. None needed to be. The first through the door was a barrel-chested master sergeant, his gray hair trimmed short, a polished cane clicking softly with each step. His eyes scanned the room like he was sweeping a battlefield. Every corner, every table, every face. A limp marked his walk, but it didn't take from his authority. It amplified it. Behind him, a tall young Marine entered, clean cut, pushing an empty wheelchair with quiet hands. And then came the third, a female Marine captain, her posture razor straight, her uniform gleaming with rows of ribbons and hard-won combat medals that caught the fluorescent lights and scattered them like truth. She didn't need to speak to be heard. Her presence alone changed the atmosphere, thickening the air, pulling tension tight across the room like a drawn wire. The young waitress froze mid-step, her tray tilting precariously in her hand. The biker stilled. Goose let the butter knife slip silently from his fingers. Tank blinked like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Blade shifted in his chair, boots slipping off the table as if by instinct, eyes narrowing under the weight of his own noise. Grace didn't move, not until the master sergeant came to a full stop in front of her table. He straightened despite the limp, squared his shoulders, then lifted his arm and gave a textbook salute, sharp, dignified, unwavering. "Staff Sergeant Torres," he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in steel. "Forgive our delay." Before her mind could register it, her body responded. Grace rose from her seat, slow but strong, and returned the salute. Her arm was steady, her gaze locked. For the first time that day, something lit behind her eyes, not pain, not fear. Recognition, honor, respect. The diner held its breath. No one spoke. No one dared to move. The three Marines stood like monuments, every stitch of their uniforms pristine, every boot clean despite the dust outside. This wasn't a request for silence. It was a command without a word. Then the captain stepped forward, her gaze set on Grace like a beam of focus that cut through everything else. Her voice was calm, controlled, but every syllable dropped like iron. "We received a call," she said, "from one of our own. He told us a decorated Marine had been harassed in public, on civilian ground." She turned slowly, eyes sweeping with full awareness. No hesitation. Her gaze landed on the far booth, on Tank, on Goose, on Blade. And just like that, all their earlier laughter vanished. Tank clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ground together. Goose couldn't look up. Blade shifted again in his seat, shrinking into the silence he had once tried to fill. The captain didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "And that physical assault may have occurred," she continued. Grace gave the slightest shake of her head. "It's nothing," she whispered, barely audible. But her words didn't go far. Not over the weight pressing down on the room now, not over what was coming next. The master sergeant didn't so much as blink. "With all due respect, Staff Sergeant, it's not nothing," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the entire diner. "No one lays a hand on one of our own. Not in combat, not in peace, not ever." There was a sharp shift in the room's energy as a younger Marine stepped forward, gaze unwavering, locked onto the bikers. His tone was firm, his stance unshakable. "Staff Sergeant Torres led us through Fallujah. When our Humvee was hit, she dragged 3 of us out under fire. I was one of them." Grace looked up at him, eyes narrowing with slow recognition as memory stirred behind them. "Private Jenkins," she said, voice softer now, colored with disbelief and familiarity. "Corporal now, ma'am," he corrected with a small nod. "Thanks to you." Across the room, a chair creaked. Tommy, the boy from earlier, stood. His young frame was straight and serious. Beside him, his father rose too, calm and resolute. A silent exchange passed between them, more powerful than words. Then from the far side of the diner, an old man wearing a Korean War veteran cap rose to his feet. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his hand to his brow in a slow, dignified salute. A woman near the entrance followed, standing tall in quiet respect. Then came 2 men in civilian clothes, members of the National Guard, rising from their seats with squared shoulders and firm posture. It spread like a ripple through still water. Within seconds, half the diner was on its feet. No one shouted. No one moved aggressively. They simply stood, straight-backed, eyes forward, forming a silent wall of solidarity and respect that filled the room more powerfully than any threat could. Goose sank into his booth like the air had been knocked out of him. Tank turned his face away, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Even Blade stayed quiet, his usual bravado gone. For the first time since they'd swaggered in, the bikers no longer owned the room. Grace did, and she did it without lifting her voice, without rising from her chair. A week passed. The sign out front no longer read Rusty Fork Grill. The old metal was gone, replaced by a fresh wooden board painted a deep, solemn navy blue. Bold white letters read, Home Front Cafe, where respect is always on the menu. Inside, the changes weren't loud, but they were undeniable. Along the back wall now hung a framed tribute, a display honoring local veterans. Rows of photos, names of units, years of service. Some in crisp dress blues, others in faded fatigues, every one of them staring straight ahead, a quiet reminder of sacrifice worn on every face. The table where the bikers had once lounged in arrogant comfort remained untouched. No one had officially closed it off. No signs, no tape, but it stayed empty, because no one wanted to sit there anymore. Grace came in each afternoon just as she always had. She still folded napkins with quiet precision, still moved with that steady, deliberate grace. But something had changed. Her Marine Corps pin, once discreetly tucked beneath her collar, was now worn openly, proudly. And taped to the back of her wheelchair was a small American flag patch. The colors were faded, the corners worn, but it held strong, a quiet declaration. Customers stopped to greet her now. Some offered a few words of thanks, others simply nodded, pausing near her booth where a new plaque hung above her seat, reserved for those who served. All gave some gave more. Dave, the manager who'd once frozen behind the counter, had transformed too. He now wore a clean button-up shirt and a neatly knotted tie, with a flag pin gleaming just beneath his collar. That week, he'd hired 2 more veterans, one for the kitchen, one to help out on weekends. Melissa, the young waitress, had changed in her own way. She asked Grace questions between tables, curious, eager to learn. She now knew the difference between Staff Sergeant stripes and Captain bars. She even understood which questions weren't appropriate to ask. Lessons Grace taught her with patience and quiet authority. In the Marines, they came back. Every Thursday evening at precisely 1800 hours, the same olive green SUV would roll into the lot. Sergeant Wilson, Captain Rodriguez, Corporal Jenkins. They never made an announcement, never gave a speech. They simply joined Grace at her booth, drank coffee, shared stories, and let silence hold the weight of memory between them. What had started as a single cruel moment had grown into something far more enduring. A diner reborn, a town reminded, a woman no longer invisible. Grace didn't smile often, but when she did, like now, listening to Jenkins retell some half-true tale from Fallujah, it was real. It softened the lines in her face and lit her eyes with something deep and enduring. One evening, just as the sun was dipping behind the hills of Montana and casting long golden beams through the front windows of Homefront Cafe, the door swung open. A young man stepped inside. He was barely out of high school, rigid in a brand new Army uniform. He clutched his cap in both hands, shoulders tight with nerves, eyes wide with uncertainty. He looked around like he wasn't sure he belonged. Grace saw him instantly. Without hesitation, she wheeled forward, her small flag patch glowing warm in the last light of the day. "First deployment?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Shipping out tomorrow morning, ma'am." She nodded toward the empty chair at her table. "Sit down. Coffee's decent. Company's better." He hesitated. Eyes scanning the room, unsure if he belonged. "I wouldn't want to intrude," he said, voice low, uncertain. "You're not intruding, soldier," Grace answered gently, her voice even and reassuring, her smile calm but firm. "You're continuing a tradition." He slid into the booth beside her, still hesitant, but welcomed without fanfare. Across the room, Master Sergeant Wilson raised his coffee cup in silent salute. No words spoken, just a gesture that said everything. One by one, other veterans followed. Some hands trembled with age. Others held their mugs steady with the precise posture of lives long shaped by duty. No one broke the silence. There was no need. The message was unmistakable. You are seen. You are one of us. You will never stand alone. From that moment forward, the town began to shift. Something deeper than change. Something like healing. Grace was invited to speak at the local high school. She didn't talk about combat or medals. She talked about what the uniform really meant. Not war, not glory, but discipline, purpose, the strength to carry others when their own legs give out. Inspired by her words, local businesses began offering discounts to veterans, unprompted, without publicity, just because it felt right. And in the center of town, a modest memorial was approved and built. Black stone, smooth, quiet, carved in silver letters, to those who served with dignity and those who stood with them. Jack and the bikers never returned after that day. The rumors spread as they always do. Someone said Jack had lost his job. Something about a video. Something about what happened going public. Grace never chased the story. There were more important things that demanded her heart, like the young woman in uniform who now stopped by every Sunday for coffee, full of questions about boot camp, about fear, about finding her footing, or the Vietnam vet who finally pulled his service medals from a dusty drawer and pinned them to his chest again, for the first time in 4 decades. Out in the parking lot, the last light of the day was fading. Grace's SUV waited, and taped to the window was a note, just a simple line written in thick black marker. "We always come back for those who never quit." And inside, surrounded by steam rising from coffee mugs and the quiet companionship of those who understood without needing to speak, Grace Torres sat at peace. Surrounded by kin, she was no longer just a former staff sergeant. She was home. If you believe no veteran should ever stand alone, comment, respect,